The slaying of a Philadelphia labor leader is being investigated as a possible mob hit over his union activities in Atlantic City. John McCullough, the head of Roofers Union Local 30, was shot 6 times at close range last night in his Philadelphia home by a man who said he came to deliver poinsettias. McCullough's union has an office in Atlantic City, and officials said today his death may be related to fierce union organizing there. Local 30 has been vying with another Long Island union to organize casino security guards in Atlantic City. Law enforcement officials said McCullough also had strong ties to Angelo Bruno, the area's alleged mafia don, who was also gunned down outside his Philadelphia home in late October. New Jersey crime officials say they're going to invite a controversial member of President-elect Ronald Reagan's transition team to testify about his alleged ties to organized crime. Officials of the State Commission of Investigation say they'll ask Teamster official Jackie Presser to refute under oath recent allegations against him. Last week, a state police detective told SCI members that Presser was a go-between for New Jersey and Boston mobsters who wanted loans from Teamster pension funds. And Monday, during hearings on a permanent license for the Ballet Casino in Atlantic City, a state official said there was a highly suspicious gift of Ballet stock to Presser in the early 1970s. Then just today, the Trenton Times quoted an internal U.S. Justice Department memo naming Presser as a man who controls union activities on behalf of organized crime. A Teamsters official on President-elect Ronald Reagan's transition team has denied he is a contact for New Jersey mobsters. Jackie Presser, a Teamsters vice president, said in a statement he was never a go-between for New Jersey and Boston mobsters seeking loans from Teamster pension funds. That allegation has been made by a New Jersey state police detective who testified before state crime officials last week. Those officials, members of the State Commission of Investigation, say they will invite Presser to answer those allegations under oath. Presser has been a controversial member of Reagan's transition team, serving on his economic affairs panel. Transition officials say Presser's duties will end, however, January 20th.
There were 2 stories of white-collar crime today involving prominent people. In Cleveland, an uncle of Jackie Presser, the Teamsters president, was found guilty of embezzling $165,000 from a local union. The government charges that the uncle, Alan Friedman, made a deal with Presser in 1976 to merge union locals, and that in return, Friedman was paid $1,000 a week since then without doing any work. Presser's been under investigation in the case, but has not been indicted and has denied the charges.
Despite President Reagan's rejection of an invitation to attend the National Convention of the Teamsters Union, it looked as if he would win their endorsement tonight anyway. Vice President Bush headed to the meeting in Columbus, Ohio, with what he called a wait-and-see attitude. Tensions developed between the president and the Teamsters last week when Teamster President Jackie Presser demanded that the president fire Donald Dotson, the chairman of the National Labor Relations Board. The NLRB is the agency that regulates, interprets laws, and referees disputes between private employers and employees. Presser called Dotson's firing a do-or-die if President Reagan wanted the support of his 1.9 million member union. The Teamsters are the nation's largest labor union and the only one to support Reagan for president in 1980.
The President's Commission on Organized Crime has sent information on Teamster Union President Jackie Presser to the Justice Department for possible criminal investigation. This was disclosed today when the Commission issued a 700-page report on organized crime's influence on 4 labor unions, including the Teamsters. The information on Presser concerned an investment he made in a Cleveland night spot that may have made him $1 million in profits. Presser refused to answer questions about it when questioned by the Commission last August. One of the Commission members said in an addendum there was compelling circumstantial evidence that the money Presser made was a payoff from organized crime for help in securing loans from the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund. Senate investigators today accused the FBI of mishandling and possibly obstructing an investigation of Teamsters President Jackie Presser. A report by the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations criticized the FBI for failing to cooperate with other agencies in probing allegations that Presser authorized $700,000 in payments to ghost workers, workers who did no work. The Justice Department dropped the investigation last year, saying some FBI agents had authorized the ghost payments. The case has since been reopened. The committee report said there was no evidence that the Reagan administration, which had Teamster election support, had influenced the case politically. But Committee Chairman William Roth of Delaware criticized the FBI.
Frankly, this has been a difficult investigation with significant roadblocks to gathering information. I must confess my disappointment at the FBI lack of cooperation during our investigation. There is no excuse for stonewalling a congressional committee which is entitled to information. The FBI's attitudes stand in marked contrast to that of other components of the Justice Department, the Labor Department, and other executive branch agencies, which were generally very cooperative during the subcommittee's inquiry.
Jackie Presser, the head of the nation's largest labor union, was indicted today on charges of racketeering and embezzlement. The indictment alleged that over a 10-year period, Presser and two other associates engaged in multiple acts of embezzlement from his hometown local in Cleveland and made more than $700,000 in payments to ghost employees. Presser, 59, was expected to be reelected to a full 5-year term as president of the 1.6 million member union at the Teamster Convention opening Monday in Las Vegas. He has denied any wrongdoing. In a related case, the head of the FBI's organized crime unit in Cleveland was indicted for making false statements. Agent Robert Frederick was accused of lying when he told his superiors that he had authorized Presser to make the ghost payments as a way of obtaining information.
Late yesterday, stunned delegates to the Teamsters Convention in Las Vegas heard Labor Secretary William Brock challenge them to clean house. Brock was speaking 3 days after Teamsters President Jackie Presser was indicted on racketeering charges. In Las Vegas, Elizabeth Brackett reports.
The indictment of Teamsters Union President Jackie Presser and the tough speech by Labor Secretary William Brock yesterday has resulted in a siege mentality at the Teamsters Las Vegas Convention.
Secretary Brock's speech yesterday?
I thought everybody's speech was very nice. Apropos.
About the problems he talked about and so on?
He didn't direct those problems at me. Did you hear him mention my name? Did you hear him say me?
No, he said
he
problems
just said
in the
if there
union.
are problems, clean them up.
Okay.
Many unions. We got to clean up some of the government too, I think. He forgot that.
Convention delegates were pleased that Secretary Brock showed up yesterday, but did not like much of what he had to say.
As Secretary of Labor, it isn't easy to hear about modded up locals or pension fund abuse, misuse of members' blood and sweat in any organization. It's impossible for me to ignore that. It is necessary for you to address it.
Many delegates view the criticism and the indictment as persecution rather than justice.
I have for almost 30 years lived with a continuing attack upon this union and all of its leadership.
Presser is expected to be reelected overwhelmingly as president of the Teamsters Union tomorrow.
In Las Vegas, Jackie Presser was reelected to a full 5-year term as president of the Teamsters Union, regardless of his indictment last week on charges of racketeering and embezzlement. Once again, America's largest and most controversial union, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, is defending itself against charges that it is corrupt and linked to organized crime. Judy Woodruff has the story. Judy?
A Cleveland grand jury made the charges last week and indicted Teamster President Jackie Presser for racketeering and embezzlement. It also charged an FBI agent with lying to the Justice Department in order to derail an investigation of Presser. Both men deny the charges, and yesterday Presser was overwhelmingly elected to serve as the union's president for another 5 years. He is the 4th Teamsters chief in the last 30 years to face federal criminal charges. What is the case against Presser and the Teamsters? We'll find out in detail after this report on the union's reaction to the highly publicized new charges. The report comes from correspondent Elizabeth Brackett, who has been in Las Vegas for this week's Teamster Convention.
You can always tell a Teamster by that certain pride he wears. Meeting all the challenges, united we stand tall.
It was closer to a coronation than an election. And when it was over, the newly re-elected Teamsters president beamed down on his subjects and forgave his enemies.
We don't want hate. We want understanding. We do need each other. Brothers and sisters, I have heard from some that I have never met or spoken to. Attacks, and they accuse us of all sorts of things. How can one show such hatred and yet have never met or dealt with the one you attacked? I have forgiven them.
The delegates here had closed ranks around their leader. Most viewed the federal indictment brought against him for racketeering and embezzlement not as evidence of corruption, but as an unfair attack against their powerful union.
I think we resent the idea, I do personally, that they've been at this thing for 5 years. They wait until Saturday before we have our convention and throw an indictment. I think it's unfair.
Presser celebrated his victory in style at a party that took up 2 ballrooms at the lavish Bally Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas. Though it did not match an earlier party where Presser had been carried in on a modified chariot by 4 weightlifters. The press was not invited to that event. Here, surrounded by supporters, with his bride of 2 weeks, it was clear that the enemy was from without, not within.
I was hoping that the media would really and truly start to question why our government would do what they've done. You don't check somebody out or investigate them for 7 years and 5 years and 72 hours before an organization that has a little under 2 million members, a little less than 2 million families, and then all of a sudden they're all coming to a convention and you indict an individual and don't even let them get arraigned in this city, force them to fly home and open a federal building on a Saturday when it's never open, and make us sign a paper and then fly back here in the midst of this large convention. That is not prosecution. That is persecution.
Most delegates echoed Presser's sentiment. Barry Feinstein is director of the Public Employees Division of the Teamsters, the fastest growing sector of the union.
I have for almost 30 years lived with a continuing attack upon this union and all of its leadership. In any given day, I can read some story in some media operation attacking this union. My posture and point of view is that it's not Jackie Presser, it's this union that is so strong and so powerful and is able to do as much as it does that is under attack, not its single leader.
Even before the indictment rallied Teamsters around Presser, it was clear that his support among the nearly 2,000 delegates here, most of them officers of their locals, was overwhelming.
It was not easy to oppose Jackie Presser at this convention, but some did. Dissident Teamsters nominated Cleveland Teamster Sam Theotis for the top job.
I wanted it, I know. I'll speak for myself. I humbly accept the nomination. Thank you.
55-year-old Sam Theotis, president of a local union in Presser's hometown of Cleveland, said he withstood the hostility of the delegates on the floor in order to begin a process of reform in the union. Theotis fell far short of unseating Presser. No secret ballots here, though. 4 hours of a roll call vote brought these results.
Presser, 1729. Theotis, 24.
Despite the crushing defeat, Theotis says he will contest the election in court. The lawsuit primarily a challenge to the way Presser was elected. Theotis and the small group that supports him, the Teamsters for a Democratic Union, say the rank and file should have a chance to vote for the leadership.
We are going to continue with our campaign for the right to vote for top officers and for delegates to the convention.
Theotis says he is not afraid to continue the challenge to the Teamster hierarchy, but admits there were some tense moments on the convention floor.
I said to one of the guys who were with me that my feet were getting cool. It has to be a little nerve-wracking to sit there and see all of this, and you're realizing that you have very little support there.
Without a change in the way the leadership is elected, Theotis says the Teamsters will continue to be hurt by the allegations of corruption and ties to organized crime. But there were few delegates that shared Theotis' concern. Despite the history of indictments, the Teamsters at this convention showed little interest in reforming either their electoral process or their leader.
Here to tell us more about the claims and counterclaims in the case is Ron Ostro, who covers the Justice Department for the Los Angeles Times. Ron, refresh our memory. What exactly did the Cleveland grand jury accuse Jackie Presser of doing?
It accused Mr. Presser and two associates of engaging in a 10-year scheme, roughly 72 to 82, of siphoning off more than $700,000 from primarily from Mr. Presser's hometown local 507 in Cleveland, and making payments with those funds to ghost employees, some of whom are named as unindicted co-conspirators in this indictment.
Now, why would he have done that? What did they say? Why in the?
The motivation is not contained in the indictment, other than what would seem the obvious personal gain for these longtime associates and so on. Earlier, it was claimed that FBI agents who controlled Presser's work as an informant for the government.
He definitely is believed to have been an informant. Is that correct?
He definitely is believed to have been an informant. And it was claimed earlier, and this is what headed off the indictment a year ago, last July, that he had been authorized to make those ghost payments as part of the scheme.
Why? Now, how would that work? I mean, why would they authorize him to?
Well, according to the Senate subcommittee, which looked into this, the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, it was to strengthen his relationships with organized crime, which would, of course, benefit the work as an informant and to keep peace.
To get more information.
That's right.
Well, now the FBI this was believed initially by the grand jury. Is that correct? By the investigators, then later.
It was believed by Justice Department officials who had to sign off on the request for the indictment.
But why did they later change their minds about it?
Well, a lot of things happened at that point. There was a good deal of press reports of each step of the Presser investigation, and so that things that normally would remain not public information became public information. It was reported, for example, that there was going to be an indictment recommended. And then the grand jury foreman of the grand jury, which had looked into it for 32 months, tired of this process and accused went to 3 judges and accused the government of foot-dragging in it. All these things came together. There was pressure from the Senate committee then. That's, I think, what finally brought it out and launched a very in-depth internal investigation inside the Justice Department and FBI.
The upshot of this is that we don't know for certain that he was an informant. We believe that he was, but it's not known for sure that he was authorized as an informant to make the payments. Is that
That's
correct?
Right. The shade of doubt exists over, and the indictment alleges that it wasn't true, especially the indictment of the FBI agent. The shade of doubt is over whether, indeed, he had any authorization at all.
Now, the FBI agent was indicted on the basis of having been involved in this scheme.
Of having made 5 counts of false statements regarding this scheme.
Now, why would an FBI agent do that?
Again, the motivation is not spelled out in the indictment. All we can get is to protect the informant system. There's nothing more important to the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a tool of investigation than informants.
Now, you talk to the people at the Justice Department. What do they think is going on? Do they think that Presser has these extraordinary ties with organized crime? What do they believe?
Oh, I don't think there's much doubt that they accept the fact that the top part of the union is mobbed up, as the expression goes. That is not part of the allegations of the Cleveland grand jury or the grand jury in Washington that indicted the FBI agent. That's incidentally being looked into by a separate grand jury in New York.
So, but it's your view that they're ready to press ahead with these charges. That this is not something that's just sitting there. I mean, that the grand jury will press ahead. There are other investigations. Is that correct?
Oh, that's right. I've never really seen an indictment that was so pregnant with suggestion of further action to come.
So what happens now?
Well, you'll have the formal proceedings. I mean, you'll have an arraignment, which was put off until after the convention, where Mr. Presser and his 2 associates will enter a plea, and you'll have a separate arraignment for the FBI supervisor, who's now working under a 30-day suspension. I'm sorry, who's been suspended for 30 days with pay and faces dismissal.
As we just saw in this report, the Teamsters seem to be, members of the union seem to be convinced that this is just a politically motivated thing by the government, by the Justice Department, by the grand jury to get at the union, that it was politically timed to come out just before the convention started. Is there anything to that, do you think?
I don't think so, no. I think it's a tribute to, at this point, to the internal investigation that both the FBI and the Justice Department conducted, if these allegations prove to be correct, that they could bring it all to the fore the way they have.
One last question. What could happen to Jackie Presser if he were convicted on these charges?
Well, in addition to the lengthy jail sentence and fines he would face, under the RICO, Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organization statute, with which he's charged 2 counts of violating, he can be stripped of his assets, and the number one asset is being president of the Teamsters Union.
Well, I know this is one we'll continue to watch. Ron Ostro, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Also, the FBI agent charged in connection with a case against Teamster President Jackie Presser was arraigned in Washington today. Special Agent Robert Friedrich headed the Organized Crime Task Force in Cleveland. He is charged with making false statements to the Justice Department in an attempt to scuttle the Presser investigation. A large group of his fellow FBI agents came to Washington today to show their support for Friedrich. They formed a long receiving line at the courthouse to shake his hand and wish him luck. The organizer of the trip said it was done as a personal show of support for Friedrich's 13 years of exemplary work as an FBI agent. Also today, Teamsters Union President Jackie Presser pleaded innocent to federal racketeering charges. Presser and 2 other Teamster officials told a federal court in Cleveland they did not pad a local union's payroll.
Good evening. A major American scandal, an alliance between organized crime and the Teamsters Union, the nation's largest and most powerful labor organization. That's the language being used to describe a tough new federal lawsuit filed today in an effort to reclaim the Teamsters from the mob. As NBC's Mike Jensen reports now, this is a showdown between a tough prosecutor and a tough union.
In response, the government suit was announced by U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani. Organized crime has deprived union members of their rights through a pattern of racketeering that includes 20 murders, including at least 14 murders of dissidents, a number of shootings, bombings, beatings, a campaign of fear, bribes, extortion and theft, and misuse of union funds. The suit names as defendants 26 alleged mafia members, among them the nation's top organized crime bosses: Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, and Carmine Jr. Persico. Also named as defendants, the 18 highest officials of the Teamsters. All 18 board members have committed mail fraud, that 7 members have committed acts of racketeering that include embezzlement, receipt of illegal labor and benefit fund payoffs, and bribery, and that 12 board members have aided and abetted wire fraud in connection with the mafia scheme to ensure the elections of the last 2 Teamster presidents. Teamster officials who flew into Montreal this week on union jets for their annual summer meeting denied any wrongdoing.
History will record that the complaint against the International Brotherhood of Teamsters marks the lowest point to which the Republican administration has yet fallen in the attack on working men and women of America.
But Ken Paff, who is a leader of the union's reform movement, welcomed the government's action.
What we want is very simple: a government supervised free election.
At a news conference in Washington, Attorney General Meese was asked about Teamster support of Ronald Reagan in the last 2 elections.
Had this evidence or had this information been available at the time, that President Reagan or then Governor Reagan would obviously not have accepted that kind of support.
Teamster President Jackie Presser, who supported President Reagan, is under indictment for racketeering and embezzlement. He has cancer and has given up day-to-day control of the Teamsters. Presser was defended today by Senator Orrin Hatch.
I have to say this, that Mr. Presser, regardless of what anybody else may think of him, has lived up to every promise that he made to me when I was chairman of the Labor and Human Resources Committee.
The AFL-CIO, which kicked the Teamsters out in the 1950s and recently took them back, blasted the suit.
The only level of corruption that I know about is what I read in the newspapers when they talk about the fact that the Teamsters are dominated by the underworld. Those are allegations. There's no proof in that.
At truck stops, Teamsters who supported their leaders stepped in front of the camera.
Because I got 4 more years and I can retire, and I'm satisfied the way things are as far as I'm concerned.
But most Teamsters who approved of the government suit did not want to be quoted. The government says it has no intention of keeping control of the Teamsters, that it wants to kick out organized crime, then have free and fair elections of new Teamster officers. Mike Jensen, NBC News, New York.
For all of the troubles that it's had over the years, the Teamsters remain a formidable force. 1,700,000 members, truck drivers, waiters, clerks, warehousemen. 3 of its presidents have gone to jail, and all of them in recent years have been investigated extensively.
The law enforcement agency got an informer who knows as much about organized crime as the one the FBI relied on to help them put away some of the country's biggest mob figures. The informant who fed the FBI information from inside the mob was codenamed All-Pro. Among other things, he told the FBI exactly how the mob made money and how it exercised control over the nation's largest labor union. And he met with them regularly, in secret, to share his information with them.
He was the most important source of information that the FBI has ever had on labor racketeering and the domination of certain labor unions by organized crime.
Oliver Buck Revell, the executive assistant director of the FBI, supervised the war on the mob and was assisted by the most unlikely of informants, Jackie Presser, who at the same time he was informing on the mob, was working with the mob as he rose to become president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the largest and richest union in the country, with over 1,600,000 members and billions of dollars in assets. For the last 5 years of Presser's career as an informant, his FBI contact was this man, Robert Frederick, then the supervisor of the Bureau's organized crime squad in Presser's hometown, Cleveland, Ohio.
His information was used throughout the country in various investigations, whether it was in Chicago or New York, Kansas City, Las Vegas. He provided information that was the basis for wiretaps, probably undercover operations. The information I was receiving was being used by agents throughout the country where mafia influence was the strongest on Teamsters.
One of those FBI agents was Bill Owsley in Kansas City.
Jackie Presser was able to give us the type of information that we needed, the pieces of the puzzle that we needed to go along with what we had developed.
Bill Owsley says Presser's information was critical in a series of mafia conspiracy cases the FBI was investigating. Conspiracies involving the mob's influence over a Teamster billion-dollar pension fund that was used to build and control Las Vegas casinos.
He was able to give us a historical background of how the pension fund began, that it was begun as a scam, as a way to steal money. He gave us the fact that mobsters and Teamsters are linked up together. He gave us that background as to how the loans are made, giving the hidden ownership and how the skim comes out of Las Vegas.
The skim, millions of untaxed dollars stolen from casinos by the mob, had been flowing for decades. Presser's information helped cut off the flow of money and send scores of mafiosi to jail. Mafiosi like
Joseph Ayupa, the boss of the Chicago family, 28.5 years. Jackie Cerrone, the underboss of the Chicago family, 28.5 years. Milton Rockman, Cleveland money mover and LCN associate, about 10 years.
And his information would go on to help convict mafiosi across the country, including the heads of New York's 5 mafia families, Teamster officials, and assorted racketeers. How did Presser become one of the FBI's most valuable informants? Tony Hughes, a former heavyweight boxing contender and loan shark, was Jackie Presser's best friend, a Teamster business agent with a 6-figure salary who acted as one of Presser's bodyguards, and talks for the first time about how Presser got involved with the FBI.
The FBI came and seen us, wanted to see both of us, came to our office and says that there was a hit threat on me and Jackie, mostly Jackie, but most likely it would be me too because I was with him all the time.
When Hughes and Presser first talked to the FBI in the early 1970s, Jackie Presser was a wealthy, mob-connected labor leader in Cleveland, and heir apparent to his father, Bill, an Ohio-based international vice president of the Teamsters. Why would Jackie Presser risk informing against the mob and the Teamsters? Ambition and fear. Fear that he, Presser, might be kidnapped and murdered, like former Teamster leader Jimmy Hoffa, or that he would be blown to pieces, like the victims of a mob war that was raging on the streets of Cleveland. And Tony Hughes says informing for the FBI fit into Presser's ambition. his plan to become president of the Teamsters, a plan that suited Jackie Presser's personality. People say he was charming, that he could be a con man.
Charm you right out of you. He was he really was fast on his feet. I wouldn't say he was a con man. I say he was a very clever, vindictive, vicious individual. Jealous. If you had something, he would be jealous of it. And he wanted everything. And he would tell you one thing, he would tell him one thing, and me another thing.
And to keep his story straight, Presser used Tony Hughes as a go-between to the FBI and the mob.
I knew the wise guys. I knew the policemen. I knew federal judges. I knew everybody in this city that was supposed to be known. That's why he brought me around.
For years, Tony Hughes would keep in touch with local mafiosi on behalf of Jackie Presser, as well as acting as contact with the FBI. When Bob Frederick, the FBI contact agent, wanted to see Presser, he would call Hughes. Similarly, if Presser wanted to see Frederick, he would call Hughes. When a meeting had been arranged, typically for a Sunday morning, Frederick would wait here in a public park on Lake Erie just outside Cleveland. Hughes would pick him up and drive Frederick to Presser's home nearby.
Jackie was constantly concerned about, how am I doing? You know, is the information I'm giving you accurate? Is it correct? Did you find out? Wasn't I right? He was always interested in knowing whether or not the information he was giving was good. He wanted to know. He was concerned that maybe some of the stuff that he gave was not correct.
The information he provided to us was always checked and verified, and we never found it to be incredible. It was always accurate, and it was, even when it was against his self-interest, was verified and proven to be true.
Jackie admitted that his father was very close to these people, and he also indicated, at least on one occasion, that his father would do favors for the mob, whatever they wanted. Hey, Bill, would you see what you could do about getting us a loan from the Central States Pension Fund for this business? I think he felt like his father got taken by the mob.
Jim Neff, who wrote a biography of Jackie Presser called Mobbed Up, told us that Presser used the FBI to get rid of his enemies.
He gives them tidbits, details, scuttlebutt, solid information about his enemies, his rivals in the Union here in Cleveland. They get targeted by the FBI, some of them get convicted and are moved out of the way. Jackie's path is cleared of these obstacles and he climbs the ladder.
By 1977, Jackie Presser moved up the ladder, succeeding his father as an international vice president of the Teamsters. Now the chief obstacles between Presser and the presidency of the Teamsters were these men. Kansas City Teamster boss Roy Williams, who was next in line to become Teamster president, and Chicago labor racketeer Alan Dorfman, a Williams ally and Presser's enemy. Alan Dorfman was a major target of the FBI because he was the mob's man inside the Teamsters' billion-dollar Central States Pension Fund. Presser implicated Dorfman and Williams in an attempted bribery plot of a U.S. senator. As a result, Dorfman and Williams were indicted and then convicted. Roy Williams, by then president of the Teamsters, went to jail because of Jackie Presser. But you wouldn't know listening to Presser in public.
I think that Roy got a very raw deal. I really do.
Explain that.
Well, I just feel that people that understand the laws of the land have to recognize the fact that he was indicted on a conspiracy. It takes several people to conspire, and unfortunately, Roy was a victim as far as I'm concerned.
Another victim was Alan Dorfman. The Chicago mob, fearful that Dorfman might talk to avoid jail, took matters into its own hands.
Dorfman was murdered, gangland style, in a parking lot in a restaurant in broad daylight. And Jackie was, you had to peel him off the wall when we met after that one, because he was very concerned about the way Chicago handled their problems, and knew he had a problem with Chicago too, and was concerned that, you know, if these guys are going to do something like this in broad daylight, there's no reason why they just wouldn't do it to him.
Jackie Presser's tightrope act leading to the top of the Teamsters seemed on the verge of success. His rivals within the union were out of the way. But then another obstacle surfaced, the press. The Plain Dealer, Cleveland's major daily and a member of the Newhouse chain, published this front-page story, accusing Presser of taking kickbacks, of racketeering, and of being an informer for the United States government.
He was like a raging lion when that story came out. His first impulse was to shut down the Plain Dealer by a strike.
There's no way he was going to be elected president of the Teamsters if his fellow board members thought he was an FBI informant.
He told me on one of our contacts that he was going to have they were going to do he was going to get a retraction.
Presser and his lawyers threatened legal action. Then they petitioned the Justice Department for help. Finally, Jackie Presser went to the very people he was informing on, the mob, for help.
His man was to go to New York to meet one of the bosses of one of the mafia families in New York, Fat Tony Salerno.
And they talked to Fat Tony Salerno, a boss there. He called Roy Cohn, lawyer, and Cohn said, one of my good friends owns the paper, Cy Newhouse. They owned they own a lot of papers across the country, one of them the Plain Dealer.
The late Roy Cohn, mob lawyer and fixer, here with his client mob boss Tony Salerno, was also an advisor and childhood friend of Cy Newhouse, the newspaper owner. At the time, Jim Neff was a reporter at Newhouse's newspaper.
Next thing we know, word is coming in from New York to our editor saying, would you please take care of Mr. Presser? And the paper ended up running a phony front page story over our protests.
And I recall meeting him. He was sitting there without his front tooth, holding this paper up, laughing his head off. You know, I did it. See, I told you I could do it, and I did it.
Presser proudly reprinted the retraction for the Teamster membership.
I think this was a first in journalism history where the mob could actually reach out and influence a phony front page story in a major metropolitan newspaper.
Contacted in New York, newspaper owner Cy Newhouse had no comment about the retraction or allegations that the mob influenced him through his friend, attorney Roy Cohn. A year after the retraction, with a secret endorsement of the FBI and the mob, Jackie Presser was sworn in as president of the Teamsters.
You are now the general president.
By the time Presser became Teamster president, he was an established political power in Washington. Jackie Presser was the Reagan White House's leading supporter in the labor movement and a personal and political friend of then Vice President George Bush.
That we are endorsing Ronald Reagan for president and George Bush for vice president.
Couldn't be more pleased.
Although the White House was warned that Presser had mob connections, it chose to ignore them. While it knew about Presser's mob ties, according to the FBI, the Reagan-Bush White House was not told that Jackie Presser was an informant.
When he did become the international president, we closed him as an informant.
Why?
Well, two reasons. One, because he had direct access into the political process of the United States. The Congress, the White House. To have an FBI informant in those circles, it could appear that the FBI was manipulating the political process. And secondly, the FBI could not be seen to have been running the union through a surrogate. Now, when we closed him, what it meant was that we couldn't go to him and ask him to find out things on our behalf. It did not prevent him from coming to us and reporting information as any citizen can do, and of course can do in a discreet manner, which he continued to do.
Not only did Presser continue to inform, but he asked and got the FBI's advice and consent on decisions concerning the leadership of the Teamster Union. But Presser's complex life of lies was coming to an end.
He viewed the presidency as an electric chair, is the term he used to use. Everybody that becomes president ends up getting indicted and convicted.
In fact, 3 out of the 4 men who preceded Jackie Presser in the office of the international president ended up in jail. And now government investigators, men outside the FBI, men who had not been told that Presser was an informant for the FBI, were trying to nail Presser. At first, the investigation seemed stalled, but speculation in the press that Presser was being protected by the White House was followed in May of 1986 by the indictment of Presser and Tony Hughes on charges they embezzled union funds by putting no-show employees on the payroll. The FBI was presumably unhappy about this, but chose to say nothing publicly.
There's a battle going on between the strike force who wants to indict Presser and the FBI who wants to see him survive. And in this battle, Bob Frederick was a casualty.
Bob Frederick was indicted at the same time for lying to government investigators, for trying to protect his informants, Presser and Hughes. And Frederick was fired by the FBI, touching off an unprecedented public protest by FBI agents. Eventually, Bob Friedrich's indictment was thrown out of court, but he wound up in jail anyway, briefly, over last Christmas. Friedrich had been held in contempt of court when he refused to testify during the trial of Tony Hughes, his former informant. And sources report that still another grand jury is sitting in Washington, D.C., deciding whether to indict Frederick and other agents for trying to protect Jackie Presser. On June 30th, 1988, the United States government announced it would try and take over the International Brotherhood of Teamsters itself, charging that the union was a labor racket and using Jackie Presser's information to prove their case. 10 days later, Jackie Presser escaped testifying in court, possible jail time, and the mob's revenge when, after 2 years of illness, he died in a Cleveland hospital of brain cancer.
I call him a crooked stool pigeon. He lies.
William McCarthy, Jackie Presser's successor as president of the Teamsters, was cross-examined last spring by a Senate subcommittee about Presser's allegations in his FBI informant file that McCarthy was controlled by La Cosa Nostra, by the mob.
I have never been approached by Costa Nostra. You had Williams and Presser, that one is a schemer and one was a liar. And they both were mixed up, as I say, with the Costa Nostra by their own admission.
As long as organized crime, particularly the La Cosa Nostra, has its tentacles in organized labor, the base information that Jackie Presser gave will be used as a predicate for further investigations and to show the pattern of activities that has led the mob to control several elements of labor.
Dead but not forgotten.
That's correct.
Today in Washington, D.C., an administrator appointed by a federal judge supervises the headquarters of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. His job is to root out officials still controlled by the mob.
Finally tonight, the Teamsters. Federal officials forced the union to make internal changes after a racketeering lawsuit. Many of the Teamsters attending the union's convention in Florida have found it hard to adjust. We have a report from Betty Ann Bowser of public station KUHT, Houston.
Point of order, point of order. I didn't nominate the man. Would you please have patience? Please have patience.
Yes.
Don't be political. Don't be political. Don't be political.
Wait a minute.
Don't be political.
I'm going to ask you that.
There's never been an International Brotherhood of Teamsters convention like this one. For 5 days, 3,000 delegates argued, debated, and voted up or down on a wide range of issues that will affect the future of the union. And for the first time ever, these delegates were elected by the rank and file, not by union machine politicians. For the first time in the union's 88-year history, the delegates voted last night by secret ballot in a kind of presidential primary. They determined who will be on a December ballot, when 500,000 to 600,000 Teamsters vote nationwide for their first democratically elected president. R.V. Durham will be one of the 3 names on that ballot.
Well, I think clearly the Teamsters Union will never be the same.
Is that good or bad?
It's good. It's good. I think we've gone through a lot of heartburn.
Durham has been a Teamster for 41 years. He lived through those days when union leaders were picked by an elite group of powerful insiders, men who frequently had ties to the mob. Of the last 8 Teamsters presidents, 4 have been indicted, 3 were convicted and served time in prison. Former union president Jimmy Hoffa is believed to have been murdered by mob elements who turned against him.
Today, the United States government is bringing a lawsuit to attack and to reverse, once and for all, a major American scandal.
3 years ago today, the federal government filed a racketeering suit against the Teamsters, charging union leaders with making a devil's pact with the mob. The suit alleged organized crime had deprived Teamster members of their rights through a pattern of racketeering that includes 20 murders, shootings, bombings, beatings, a campaign of fear, extortion, and theft.
You can always tell a Teamster by the certain pride he wears.
At the last Teamsters convention in Las Vegas in 1986, the late Jackie Presser ran unopposed. He was carried into the convention hall on a chariot in what almost amounted to a coronation.
This settlement, which union leaders agreed to early today, culminates 30 years of efforts by the Department of Justice to remove the influence of organized crime within the Teamsters Union.
3 years later, the Teamsters signed a consent decree with the federal government to avoid a trial over the lawsuit. The union agreed to purge its mob connections and hold democratic elections. So at this convention, court-appointed monitors control just about everything, from media access to the convention floor to the length of nominating speeches.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
When delegates go to vote, they are carefully monitored by court-appointed election officials. All this has many rank-and-file grumbling that the union no longer belongs to them. California Teamster Chuck Mack is typical.
They're second-guessing every internal decision that we make with regards to finances. Who gets appointed to jobs, how many people get appointed to jobs, what local unions will get loans, what local unions will get grants, expenditures for organizing. They have the right to approve or veto all of those expenditures. That's the position the government's taken. It's almost like we're going to eliminate democracy to ensure democracy.
Union presidential candidate Ron Carey, a reformer, agrees, but says the Teamsters have no one to blame but themselves.
Sure, there's corruption in the Teamster Union. And what we've lacked is the guts and the courage to get it out. There are all sorts of things that could have been done through the years. You look at the track record, the fact that 4 past vice presidents have been indicted. I mean, that's some real serious signals we send to our members.
Michael Holland is the court-appointed official overseeing the elections this week, and on balance, he is pleased.
I think that the delegates and the members of this union and the candidates, and there have been almost 70 of them down here, as well as the union as an institution, have every right to be proud of their collective effort. It's been contentious. There's been a lot of good debate. There's been great discussions about the union policy, and there's a horse race among a lot of candidates for union office here.
Federal officials have convinced a number of Teamsters they believe corrupt to step down. Federal District Judge Frederick Lacey banned 30 Teamsters from attending this convention because of ties to organized crime. Reform advocates say all of this change is not only good for the Teamsters, it's good for all unions. Susan Jenick belongs to a union watchdog organization.
I think it can do nothing but help the labor movement. Every union organizer I talk to tells me the first thing they're confronted with is that the employers say union officials are corrupt. And the epitome of that corrupt union officer is a Teamster official. If the Teamsters union cleans up its act, it will help every union organizer do a better job of convincing the members that unions will be good for them.
Perhaps the strongest statement the Teamsters made about change this week was symbolic. Instead of meeting in Las Vegas again, the union went instead to Walt Disney World. And although some Teamsters want to go back to the old days,
I hope the next convention will be in Las Vegas.
government monitors say the old days and the old ways are gone forever.